You're listening to Ruminating with RealAg, the podcast that chews on the latest in beef production, with your host, Amber Bell.
This is Ruminating with RealAg, and I am your host, Amber Bell. Today I'm really excited to have Jeff Bectel joining me. Jeff is the coordinator for the Carnivores and Communities program out of the Waterton Biosphere region. Now, as their name suggests, they are based out of the Waterton area. Waterton, for those that don't know, is in southern Alberta. It is a gorgeous region. There is mountains, there's also a lot of ranch land, a lot of grasslands, and with an area like that, there are also a lot of predators. And so those predators can sometimes cause problems with the ranchers and with livestock in the area. So we're going to talk to Jeff about what exactly management techniques look like down there, how they're working with producers to cohabitate with the wildlife. So welcome, Jeff. It's wonderful to have you.
Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So you're with the Waterton Biosphere region, and you guys have a pretty cool program going on there. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about your region, for one, because it's beautiful where you are, but then talk a little bit about your program with the Carnivore and Communities.
Okay. So the Waterton Biosphere region, this is a UNESCO designation, so United Nations Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. It's a designation. There are biosphere regions or reserves throughout the world. There are two in Alberta. The other one's up at Beaver Hills, east of Edmonton. So they are supposed to promote environmental work, but also sustainability for local communities. So the goal is something I think everybody can get around, right? Healthy environment and healthy economic opportunities for people that live there and all of those kind of things. The reality of pulling both of those off is sometimes tricky, but we've been a biosphere since the late 70s. So our biosphere region encompasses the municipalities of Cardston, Pincher Creek, and Ranchland. And then Waterton National Park is the core of our area. And then we also, our program also includes parts of the MD of Willow Creek as well. So it's a pretty big area, all the way from Chain Lakes in the north to the US border in the south here, and from the BC boundary eastward a little ways. So,
Right, and that area has a lot of carnivores.
Yes, and I guess always has, but probably since the 90s, it's been increasing. Like the first time, my family ranch is just along Highway 2, just 3 miles north of the Montana line, and the first time in recent memory that my family had grizzly bears on our property was in about 1993, and the people further west they'd had them much more, but they've been expanding eastward this last 30 years, and so that's led to an increase in conflict with people and large carnivores, and to the community's credit, they've tried to find ways to approach those problems in proactive ways and constructive ways, and the government of Alberta, the government of Canada, and other organizations have stepped forward to help people trying to coexist with some animals that are pretty awesome and sometimes problematic.
Right. And I mean, I'm part of the hiking communities in Alberta, and I know that there's a lot of talk about bears. Like, I think there's been more sightings probably than I've seen in the background. How problematic are, grizzly? We talk mainly about grizzlies. I think that's where your guys' work started. But how problematic have those been? And then branching into like cougars and wolves as well.
Right. So problematic. That's the short answer. Trends, when we were first starting this work, the trend for conflicts as reported to the province through Fish and Wildlife officers was upward. on grizzly bears especially. There was a definite upward trend in the number of conflict situations with people. Um, in our region, with so many landowners participating in programs and projects, I think we've got data showing that it's been mitigated somewhat, right? I think the trend would have been worse and continued to go upward in the absence of the work that we're doing with the community. But it's by no means just gone away, and
Hmm.
it's a little bit variable from year to year and community to community. As people implement these strategies, it definitely works. But when you're running livestock, particularly on a large landscape, it's difficult to. It's one thing to make a grain bin bear proof, but it's another thing to make a community pasture bear proof, right?
Right.
So some of it depends on what sort of a year it's been. Are the bears, do they have lots of other food sources? Is the berry crop good? Sometimes a bad berry crop year leads to more conflict. And sometimes if a particular bear or wolf pack starts to key in on livestock, sometimes we see a spike in problems, and sometimes the real answer sometimes is for the removal of that individual animal or pack.
Right. And how often do you see that? Because that was kind of one of the things I was thinking to ask is if there's a problem bear in the area, are I mean, we have wildlife all around us. Everyone, I'm up in northern Alberta. There's wildlife around us. Um, 90% of the time, we don't see them or even know they're there. So is it typically that there's just like the odd problem animal, or are we looking at like generally you see a grizzly, it's probably going to cause a problem?
You know, most of the ranchers would tell you they'll see lots of grizzly bears that don't seem to cause a problem. Um, but when there is a problem, it can be big.
It's a
Like
big one.
we've, yeah, like this year in certain neighborhoods, there's been some producers that have had pretty high loss rates. Um, and the challenging thing is, depending on the landscape, um, all of those losses can't be verified. So
Hmm.
that's one of the tricky things. If you if you counted them out and you count them back in at fall roundup, but you only found two or three of the missing livestock, the but
You
you
don't know
lost
what
10
it
or
is.
15, it can be tough. And producers know that you do lose things from a variety of causes, and you don't find everything, especially in treed landscapes. But
Hmm.
most producers they're used to a certain percentage of loss, and they try and manage for that. And when those losses spike up and there's been some predator activity, uh, mostly people assume, but probably correctly, that the majority of those missing livestock that are above the normal number are predator related. So it's challenging. People are doing their best, really, and the support from government is great. But it's a problem that I think we've made progress on. We're doing some great things, but it's not a simple solution. If you do this one thing, it will
That's it,
solve
you're good for.
everybody's problem everywhere.
Yeah.
It certainly isn't the case.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into some of those mitigation techniques. Um, like I said, and maybe if you can kind of touch on the wide range of carnivores on how they would work. So, what would be your number one that you recommend to producers to go out to help with some of these carnivore issues?
All right. So one of the things we kind of point out is that on a farm or a ranch, pretty much everything there is somehow an attractant for wildlife, right? Um, and if we're talking about grizzly bears specifically, right? If you've got a standing oat crop, that can be a strong attractant for bears. If you've got livestock, that's an attractant. If you've got grain bins, if you've got chickens, if you've got carrots growing in your garden, if you've got an apple tree or berry bushes, and then you've just got the natural habitat. So we acknowledge right up front that pretty much everything on a farm or ranch can be an attractant for wildlife, including grizzly bears. But some of these attractants can be managed. So if you've got a grain bin that grizzly bears have discovered, and once they discover it, they're likely to come back every year and come to that grain bin and open the door on it, or work away at the wooden floor on it, or if it's a wooden bin, tear an opening in the side of it, and that will happen yearly. So that's an attractant that, it's manageable. You can make a bear-proof grain bin. So a lot of our work, a lot of our projects have been around that. So we've provided bear-proof doors for grain bins. We've put cement floors in. We've helped people put them on hoppers, um, and we've put electric fences around them. We've replaced wooden grain bins with a new bin or with a shipping container, a sea can. So depending on what the producer needs, does he want a bucket feed out of it? Does he need to be able to walk in and out of it? Or is a hopper bottom great? Whatever that producer needs, we'll look at with them. So grain and feed storage is definitely one of the things we've done the most projects on. We've also done a lot of electric fences, sometimes around calving fields, or you know uh, for flocks for goats and sheep. Um, so we've definitely, and electric fence around feed storage as well. So, and around beehives. So all
So
of
what
these
does that
things.
look like? Is that just one wire,
Well,
or
so
can you
our
go into
go-to
it a little bit?
electric fence, yeah, our go-to electric fence is a 6 wire fence that has alternating hot and ground wires. Um, Standard height of your regular barbed wire fence. It doesn't have to be way higher than that for bears, wolves, that sort of thing. And with the alternating hot and cold system, that way, even if for some reason the ground was dry or frozen, the bear's going to contact 2 wires and get a good shock. So we've got a high confidence in those fences. Sometimes, depending on the attractant, um, sometimes we do have a problem with digging. So for most things, it works really well. But for something like if somebody is composting dead stock, particularly if the bears have been eating that dead stock in the past, it's a bigger job to keep filling in holes and putting extra wires. But we've seen producers eventually succeed at convincing the bears to stay away. But it takes some work, and yeah, hats off to producers that are willing to try that.
So
Um,
when they're doing the electric fencing method, because I've worked with a lot of electric fence doing rotational grazing and such, um, do you find that, like, I know the cattle will kind of realize, oh, this is an electric fence, and they'll start to just leave that area. They won't push it at after a certain point, especially if it's been really hot for a long time. Do you find that the wildlife sort of learns that, or especially if it's, an animal like a pack of wolves is the same pack that's in the area all the time?
Definitely, yes. It- we've had some fences up for more than a decade, and if you put cameras up, bears will come and check it out. But once they seem to be able, like your cattle, they seem to be able to sense that there's electricity there, and they're if they're not completely naive to what electricity and electric fences are, they don't even touch it. If
Hmm.
it's something that they've been getting into, then it's going to take a little longer because they're accustomed to going there to get fed, and they'll test it and try it, and like I said, sometimes if the reward is big enough, they'll try more and try and dig under. But definitely, fencing is a really great option for certain circumstances. It does take a little bit of maintenance, but it is a really good option. And the other things for grain storage and feed storage are really good too, and usually involve less maintenance. Once you've got a once you've got a hopper bottom bin, as
It's
long as
there.
yeah, it's there, so that works well. Um, Another big attractant that we help people manage is dead stock.
Hmm.
So, um, at one point in time, rendering services were free in the province, but haven't been for quite some time. And so we we pay for dead stock pickup within a certain region. Um, from farms and ranches, we're unable to pay for pickup from feedlots. Just the volume would break our budget. But we spent a little over $80,000 last calendar year, and we've picked up probably close to 7,500 carcasses since 2009. Um, and for some landowners, that's been a really big part of decreasing their conflict. As soon as the bears couldn't reliably come and find a bone pile to feed at, um, there's some producers that say their conflict levels dropped just from managing dead stock. Other
Wow.
people that maybe live on the river, they're still having bears. It's a travel corridor, and so it's not the only solution, but managing your dead stock is a big part of it. And for those people like a feedlot, if they're interested in it and want to on-farm compost, we'll help them with an electric fence around that area too. So yeah, there's lots of ways to manage dead stock responsibly, but that's definitely a low-hanging fruit when it comes to decreasing large carnivore conflict.
Right, definitely. And so just to touch on the electric fence issue, because I know that that can be a big cost, big investment. Is that what you guys recommend? So you mentioned the garden, which is something because I wouldn't have really thought about, oh, my garden might be attracting wildlife other than the ones that you obviously see and are a problem like rabbits. So is that, do you find that the investment is usually worth it for producers? I know you guys help out, but if there wasn't funding for it, do you think the investment in electric fencing like that would be worth it?
So the short answer is yes,
Hmm.
but it does depend on the circumstance, right? And how much value somebody places on something. Like there are people that would say, you know what, I don't have the time to build and maintain an electric fence around my garden. And other people are just they they really do think
Just get
it's
it done.
valuable, and also from a safety perspective, it's just one less reason for the bear to be in the yard. So, people have to measure that for themselves, but I think definitely people have found these projects valuable. Um, some projects they do, like here's an example, not on gardens, but on grain bins. One of our early projects, there was a big bunch of grain bins. I can't remember if it was 20 or more, and bears were accessing some of them. And we were prepared to put an electric fence around those grain bins, and it would have worked. The landowner um, was concerned about his time and making sure that it was maintained yearly with deer around and things. And that landowner decided to put all of these grain bins up on hopper bottoms with cement under them, and far exceeded our program's ability to share a 50% of the cost in. But we did give, the portion that we would have put towards electric fence towards it. So most of the time our projects are kind of a 50-50 cost share with the producer including their labor as part of their contribution. But in
Right.
this case, that producer spent over $100,000. Um, but in the end, he increased his grain storage capacity, eliminated his bear problems, got a little bit of help from us, and continues to be happy with it to this day. But that not everybody would be able to do that or choose to do that, and some people might choose the electric fence.
Right.
So there's a broad range of options, and just like on all kinds of things we do on our farms, one producer might decide that that new tractor
This
is
is
worth
worth
it,
it.
and the other guy will fix the old tractor, and they're both working.
That's very true. And then there's daily management stuff, I'm sure, that producers can do. And I mean, like coming from doing a lot of hiking and stuff, hey, make sure if you're spending the night, you're putting your food up. So what are some of the daily management things that producers can do on farm?
Right. So that's a that's a very diverse one as well, right? But I think as people become aware that these large carnivores are around their properties, and um, at first, I think people, um, understandably, their first thing is, I don't want this problem. I didn't used to have bears on my property, and why do they have to be here now? Even though people admire them and think they're pretty fun to see, the reality of it is it just takes that extra work. And so
Mhm.
just getting your head around it to start with and realizing this is maybe a new reality, and just accepting that it's maybe something you have to pay attention to is important. So then you just realize, well, what do I do with it can be simple things like, how am I feeding my dogs or my cats? Um, what am I doing with yard compost or table scraps? Um, where do my kids feed the 4-H calves? And is it a bulk bag of grain that's sitting outside the barn that now the bears are getting into? And this is a safety issue. So how might I do this differently? Um, are we looking out the window before the kids walk to the bus and say, yeah, looks clear, and make some noise? These are realities that people have to deal with, and start to think about, and justifiably sometimes they're not happy about that. But
Right.
there's a lot of things. Or if you are fixing fence in a brushy area, are you going to carry some bear spray with you? Um, because it's not too handy to carry your rifle along with your fencing tools. But your bear spray, you could put it on your belt and have that extra safety, making noise that you might not have worried about trying to make before. So all of these things are become part of people's daily lives when specifically when they've got bears around.
Do you find dogs are a deterrent or an attractant? Because I've heard mixed things about that as well.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the dog. They'll tell you with hiking that your dog sometimes will go and bother the bear and then lead it straight back to you. So from that point of view, a dog might not be the best, but um, I guess having dogs that you can control and that you've got some ability to manage. And then if you're talking specifically livestock guardian dogs, they can be very effective. Um, on grizzly bears, people that have people that have had success with livestock guardian dogs on grizzly bears, it's generally not a single dog. They need a pack of dogs. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not just Maramas and Pyrenees. You need some bigger, more aggressive dogs like Anatolians and Akbash and some of these things. The people that have success it's usually multi-breed packs, and we're talking 7 or more dogs. And then people do feel that can help keep grizzly bears from preying on your livestock or coming into a farmyard setting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, you don't think of that either. Again, being up north here, we don't really have that many grizzly bears. We do have black bears and a lot of coyotes and stuff. And I know I've heard mixed things even about the coyotes on the dogs. Like some people are like, nope, the coyotes will come in and try and draw my dogs out. What about wolves? How
Yes,
many?
similar thing. So most of the producers that I'm aware of that I've had firsthand contact with are not right in our area that are really being successful with wolves and bears. But there's a great video online from a guy in Saskatchewan that's got a lot of wolves around, that's had success for his flock, and people down in the States, in Montana and Wyoming, that I know who definitely have success. They do have to have this multi-breed pack. Like you referenced coyotes just leading dogs away.
Mhm.
So what I know about that is people talk about having some sticky dogs. So maybe white dogs that really stick close to the flock and won't get led away, and other dogs that are willing to pursue those animals away. And so you've got to have both kinds. Otherwise, if all you've got is aggressive dogs, then some pack of wolves might lead them all away while the rest of the wolves go in and kill. And if you've only got the sticky dogs that aren't aggressive enough, they can be killed by the predators. So you've got
Right.
to have this multi-breed pack that works together. Um, and it does work, but like some of those producers I know still use electrified night pens because even with all of these dogs, the dogs just get worn out if there's not an electrified night pen that they can have them in at night. So
Hmm.
it really takes a lot of thought from producers' point of view to coexist with these animals. It's a challenge, but people are doing it and doing it successfully. Um, and it's super interesting, right? Anytime you get around the people that have these dogs, they are amazing. You
Hmm.
just you almost want a dog because they're so cool, but for some people, their losses probably don't justify it, right? Because a dog's a bunch of money and feeding those dogs is a bunch of money. So
Right.
producers have to weigh, is this the right solution for
Is
me?
it worth it? And then what would you say, what are some management techniques that producers, so we talked about being able to use electric fence and stuff, which works really well on maybe a smaller land base. But what would you say to the people who are going out to a community pasture or, out on the range type thing and on a larger base where it might not be as economically feasible?
Right. And that's a great point. We're not we're not going to electrify the whole country and keep bears out of everywhere or wolves. Um, I don't think wildlife proponents, right, don't want that either. We talk about trying to have wildlife friendly fencing on the one hand, and yet we're trying to exclude certain wildlife with fencing on the other hand. So there are situations that electric fence is not the option. And so when you're looking at grazing livestock on large landscapes, um, the tools are fewer, right? So uh, I still think some sort of dead stock management can be effective. Sometimes that means moving the livestock away from where an animal has died until it's consumed, if you can't feasibly remove it.
Right.
Um, Other things is just human presence, regular human presence. Range riding is an excellent thing, right? And it's not just checking your cows. It's not just putting out salt. It's it's checking your cows well, um, putting in the miles, which again costs money. If either you're going to do it yourself or you're going to hire a rider, and it costs money. But when that rider is with the livestock regularly, um, other techniques involve, like if you find wolf tracks, people talk about following them, and that the
Hmm.
wolves are smart enough to know that you're onto them. And there's producers that swear that those kind of things actually make a difference and make the wolves more wary and less likely to bother the stock. I don't think it's a guaranteed. Um, Other things are, teaching the cattle to behave like a herd. So if your flock is really spread out, if your herd is really spread out, they're more vulnerable. But if they're bunched, they're a little bit tougher. And some of this is counterintuitive, right? Sometimes we talk about wanting our livestock to really spread out across the field and cover it well. Um, and from an animal health perspective, we like things nice and spread out. But but people do feel like if if your herd can learn to behave like a herd, it can provide some measure of protection. Um, but I guess the thing I'd like to add here is, as we as producers do our very best on these things, then the other part of coexistence is that there's compensation for people's losses, right?
Hmm.
There needs to be compensation that's dependable. And that's, I think, one of the weak links right now. There's some pretty good compensation programs, but when producers can't find all their losses, we think that there's opportunity to improve those programs to make them more responsive to the needs of the producers. And then also an ability to use lethal control when necessary, right? So I think when all of these things are grinding together, we get a sustainable sort of future.
Mm.
But if you hang your hat on just one, it doesn't
It's
work.
not going to work.
If
No.
the only thing you do is electric fence, there's going to be some unhappy people. If the only thing you do is compensation, you might go broke.
Right.
If the only thing you do is shoot stuff, society's going to say, "Hey, that doesn't work. We want you to try and coexist with these animals on these landscapes." And I think farmers and ranchers want to as well, right? It so not having it just be a all or nothing on one thing. It's all of these tools together.
Well, I know, and speaking of the shooting, just going out and shooting them, um, that's one of the things that we see on the ranches up north here is there'll be coyotes, so it's just a normal practice to go out and shoot the coyotes when they start coming around. However, one of the things that I've heard, and maybe you can speak into this a little bit, is sometimes you'll shoot coyotes that really aren't causing a problem, and that'll leave a space for problem coyotes to move in. So you could end up actually increasing your problem by killing off ones that really are okay.
Yeah, and that's a tough one, right? I think what you're saying is absolutely true, and lots of people w would attest to that, right? I know I've talked to numerous people over the years that their grandfather or father told them, don't, if that coyote's not causing you problems, leave it alone, because if you shoot it, some other coyote might move in that is going to cause you problems. Um, but sometimes it's tricky for people when they've been having trouble to know
To just,
which one is it is. And like for wolves, for instance, when people don't often get a chance to shoot a wolf, and so sometimes the go-to is I can't wait to find out if that one's a good one or a bad one. Um,
right.
but but it is a true principle, and I think it's something that people need to consider and think, well, where can I where can I work with the wildlife in a way that's going to benefit us both? Um, but it's even sometimes even good packs, when they get large enough, become bad packs.
Right.
So there's a lot of nuance in the whole thing, I think. And like on bears, like talking about behaving as a herd, I've seen my 200 cows chase a grizzly bear right out of a field more than once.
Wow.
And yet another day they kill something. And I
Yeah.
don't know what the difference is. Were my cattle spread out and it was a just a real good opportunity that the bear took advantage of, or for some reason that bear buffaloed my cows more than my cows buffaloed the bear that day. I don't know, but we know that some livestock can learn to be a little more resistant, and some wildlife can be pretty good to have around and not cause us problems. But it's a it's a very dynamic situation that is going to have to be evaluated and managed constantly, I think.
Hmm. The behaving like a herd thing's interesting too, because I've heard that from a animal movement perspective, and how if you can train your herd to behave like a herd, cattle drives are a lot easier. You know, moving them into the corrals is a lot easier because you don't have the stragglers all over the place. So it is interesting to hear that perspective as well. We
Yeah.
talked a little bit about ungulates, and I know that's not your guys' specialty, but how much of this would work when it comes to deer and elk that might be causing problems in hay and feed?
So, yeah, I guess certainly for stackyards and things, fencing, we know that that's probably the best thing you can do is end up with a good fence, and it costs some money, whether it be a page wire fence that's tall or a 3D fence. People have tried that with some success. Um, People that have electrified things as well. I know we've had some producers where they felt the elk pressure was just so great that a simple page wire fence wasn't enough because the elk would tear it apart. So then adding some electricity to that. So small areas are easy. big areas and standing crops are tougher. And yeah, I don't know if I've got. I think producers probably know as many ideas as I do. It just it's again this what evaluating and keeping your mind open, I think, for are there some ideas I could try? And then where does wildlife management fit into this?
Hmm.
And sometimes people even quit growing certain crops, which is, that's a bummer that
Yeah.
all of a sudden your crop decisions are based upon what your wildlife is. But that's a reality, and some people make those decisions, and yeah.
Hmm. Another question that I have, do you guys, any of your producers in your region typically work with some of the trappers in the region?
Yes, yeah. So uh, certainly there's a feeling among many producers in particularly further west areas where the wolf packs are that having an active trapper removing some animals is a good way to keep the pack from getting too large and
Hmm.
having a spike in livestock losses. From a wildlife point of view, you know, some of the wolf people would say that those kind of things can be very disruptive to the pack, and and that you end up with more problems because all of a sudden you've got a new pack in or the pack dynamic changes. So I think there's some knowledge, there's some wisdom on both sides of it, and it's a tough one to decide when's the right time to employ that. But there's definitely we definitely have producers that their feeling is having working with some trappers to manage pack size and wolf numbers is beneficial.
Right. And it probably helps to work with an experienced trapper rather than, someone who just does it for fun on the side.
Yeah, they've definitely found that wolves are a different thing, and you've got to learn how to do it because wolves are really smart.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So with that too, how much does understanding the predator's behavior play into what management techniques, a producer is going to use? How important is it for them to know, like, hey, these are when they're at, the most active, that type of thing?
Right. And I think that is valuable, right? Every bit of knowledge that we get is valuable. So, um, one of the things that we think we found, when when a pack of wolves is teaching the new pups how to kill, that can be a vulnerable time, right? So, seasonally, are there certain places that you're going to see higher losses? We've anecdotally had producers tell us that I don't have trouble, but my neighbor does, and I think it's because this one particular coulee or valley or draw is just it's really ideal, and the wolves have learned how to use the landscape to hunt there. So
Mm.
maybe we alter our time grazing in that field, or we do something different. So learning something about how the wildlife is doing things, I think, is valuable. But again, it's variable, right? One pack to the next, one bear to the next. So just like everything, we can't hang our hat on a single bit of information or technique. But the more we learn about all of it, I think the better we are.
So, just kind of as we wrap up here, do you see any trends in the future? Is there any, do you know of any research that's happening based on it that might have something, coming out that's going to be a little bit more useful for, say, those people that do have large expanses of land that they're trying to.
Yeah, I think the basic ideas and techniques will always hold true, but there is technology coming that may help. I guess we're continually amazed at some of the things that are starting to be used now that years ago we would have thought, well, that'll never happen. Whether it's autonomous things or AI things, but there's there's well, so trail cameras can be useful, right? To know what's out there, but then you've got to look at all these pictures. of blowing grass and deer and whatever. With AI, they're saying that we're probably going to see some pretty reliable trail cameras that if you only wanted to know about bears and wolves, that's all it would take pictures of. Um,
Right.
so those kind of things can be interesting. We've had people start to experiment with things like an automated salt trough that, in a way to gather animals into a tighter herd at night, is shut during the day, but will open at night so that the animals get in the habit of coming to the mineral at night and being bunched up. Um, there's talk of using drones to haze predators, and that something would alert you that there's like so for instance there's some tags now that can tell you in real time where your livestock is.
Hmm.
And they can tell you how active it is, and so you can have it alert you if it's exhibiting a behavior that might be consistent with fleeing from a predator,
Right.
right? So I don't know if these things will become affordable and make sense for people, but possibly, right? Where maybe one day the cell phone will wake you up and tell you that there's a predator in your cattle and that the drone is now flying and is actively paintballing the bear. I don't
That would be
know.
pretty cool.
Yeah.
The 3D fencing, I remember when that first started, there started being some research around it and people are talking about it. So has that picked up? Is there a lot of people using 3D fencing?
Well, I don't know if there's a lot of people using it, but some people are, and some people think it actually is worth the expense of it. So, um, and technology tends to come down in price with time. So,
Mm,
yeah, who knows where we're going with some of this? Chances are there will be some technological tools, but they probably won't solve it all on their own. All of these other things will continue to be part of it.
there's no magic bullet.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And do you have any words of encouragement for producers that might be struggling with wildlife issues?
So one of the things I think you mentioned to me before we started the interview too, is maybe some of the value that these things have, beyond just the financial gain. So in my opinion, we all like what we do. Agricultural producers like doing this. It's a great place to raise your family. At times, it's a pretty good living, and sometimes when the markets are down, it's pretty tight. But um, we like growing healthy food, and we want people to know that. And so
Hmm.
we do all of these things, whether it's verified beef production or you know just all of the different things we do, the things to look after riparian habitat and off-stream waters, all of these things. And so when it comes to the things like bears and wolves and cougars, um, everybody loves to see them. They're amazing to watch, right? And we probably want to know that they're out there, just like we want to know there's tigers in India and lions and elephants in Africa. So just accepting the fact that this is a difficult thing, trying to think what can I do about it and what resources are there that can help me do it, take advantage of those resources, and then be willing to tell the story. Because it is a great story. When I think most people that are outside of agriculture, when they learn that somebody is trying to raise good, healthy beef and look after the grasslands and look after the streams and rivers and wetlands and provide a home for a grizzly bear and try and live with him, people appreciate that. And then when they understand all you're doing, then hopefully they're a little bit more accepting of the fact that once in a while something has to be shot, right?
Right.
Something has to be removed, and that it's not it's a bad day for that bear, but it's probably a good day for bear conservation in general because
Hmm.
you're supporting the landowner that is supporting those species.
Right. Well, that is an amazing note to end off on. And I just want to thank you so much for your time, Jeff. This was fantastic.
Thank you very much.